Hey everybody, welcome back. A little bit of a wild day here. We can just see we finished that 47.69.25. A couple key things happened today that we should point out before we really get into this. But let's watch that 47.69.25 level. You can kind of see here the open was literally the high. You can just see doji, doji, doji rolling. You're not really down below this bar, and I think that's very important. Here's that doji from here, which is always a sign of uncertainty. You can see how you pop through here, and then you retested that area. But if you really come across here and take a look at that from here over, you're not going to really see as much of an issue here. Let's do it this way so you can really see what I'm talking about. Let's zoom out on this because the majority of this is really one big trade right now. And we should focus on it as one big trade. So if you just come to this level and just draw straight across, you can see that we held right here again, right? So we did make this what? We do have a lower high, and that's not too exciting, is it? You come across here and you still haven't made that lower low yet, and that's definitely something that we want to pay attention to. But I guess people can just say, okay, well, I kind of see that slope, and I get it. But we're not really breaking. You do have your trend line from here over, and you can say, oh, we crashed that trend line. Yeah, you did. You did. And now you have to see what happens with it. And you also finished 50% down on that bar. So whenever you have bars like this, you just kind of want to measure them off and see where you lie, right? So I always use 50%. And you just want to make sure where you're at on that. So who won the day out on that bar? You could say that the sellers won out on the day on that particular bar, right? Now, what's always interesting to me is what drove this. And this is going to be a really quick lesson. And this is definitely something you want to pay attention to because it's going to be actionable. Before I even get into it, I just want to just talk about this as well. Wick. You know, we could really be breaking down here. I'm going to clean off. Let's do it this way. Let's clean this one off. We're going to clean this off too. We're going to leave that up there for a minute, but let's do the same thing because watch this. This was just absolutely fascinating to me today. They were buying the NASDAQ, 50%. They're buying the NASDAQ. So they are buying tech more than they are buying ES on that rally at the end of the day. How about the Russell? If you come here and you just measure that par at the end of the day, it's kind of crazy, but even there, you're over that 50% level, right? So if you just drop a 50% demarcation line, it tells you who won the day. You might not like that it's red or green, but if you're red and then at the end of the day you finish here, remember wicks are a price rejection. This could have finished anywhere that it wanted to. That's where it chose to end. And that's how you have to look at it. That's how I look at it. I get it. You're down 79 basis points. You're down 57 basis points across. We put in just the simplest of indicators before we even continue. I think it's pretty interesting you were unable to close below the 22-day moving average. I use a 12, a 22, and a 55. You should use what you're comfortable with. This is the first close of the ES below the 22, but that has more issues. You're more tied to the dollar and you're more tied to the bond market, but we have to be cognizant of that. We did close below the 22 here. And of course, the RTY has just been an absolute dumpster fire. And we're hoping that we hold in here at this 1873. And we're going to have to see how that goes. But a lot of this was triggered by the bond market today. And we're going to talk about this in some detail right now, because I think that this is a really important lesson that people could learn and really profit from. I know that we did today. I'm just going to kind of walk through this. So the one thing that I really hammer home here is the stool. I mean, we talk about the stool all the time. And the market does not move just on technicals. You move on macro, fundamentals, and technicals. And you shift on this, determining which way you're actually leaning. Are you leaning on the macro leg, the fundamental, and technical? Remember, technical doesn't always do the trigger. Sometimes the trigger is macro. So what I like to tell people is you want to know when the big events are. Like today was a 20-year bond event. This is the mark of that bond auction. So I'll show you something in a moment here that was for me, it was pretty profitable, and I spelled it out pretty clearly. It's one of the things we watch. We watch these bond auctions. We watch them very, very closely, especially when you have a 20-year bond auction. The first movement out of the rip was just on that 20-year movement. So as people are sitting here technically looking at the chart, it doesn't really matter, but watch this. Now, on this chart, you have the S&P, you have the dollar, and you have the 10-year. So as soon as you start seeing from 1 p.m. and you see the 10-year creep up, what happens to the S&P? It drops. What happens to the dollar? It goes higher. Remember, yield rises. Okay, it's really important to remember this, guys, because it's pretty much the easiest trade in the world. Yield rises. Let's get that arrow. Say it for one more time. Yield rises. S&P will drop. Dollar will go higher. Okay. What happened? I mean, it is not rocket science. So I'll even mark it off. This is where the yield rose. That's the S&P dropping. This is where yield peaked. That's where the S&P stopped going down. This was the easiest trade in the world today. All right. It was very, very simple. Didn't matter what you were looking at technically. Doesn't matter what pattern, the triple Indy, the blueberry. It does not matter. Okay. as yield rises, the S&P is going to drop. The S&P should drop, I should say it that way. When yield peaked, the S&P stopped going down. It was that simple. It's not a coincidence when you look at this chart, I'll clean it off and then you'll be able to see it. It's not a coincidence that you have a head and shoulders here, right? You should see it on the dark blue, left shoulder, head, right shoulder, neckline, right here, right? See the neckline? Okay. Not a coincidence that you have an inverse head and shoulders right here, head, left shoulder, right shoulder, neckline, right? It's not a coincidence that you have an inverse head and shoulders on the S&P there. So I'm going to take a moment to walk you through this just so you can see how we did this, or how I was showing in observations how to do this. Let's pull this all the way down. But where do we start here? We'll start here. Well, this is just NVIDIA, and what I was looking at was just showing everyone the anchored VWAPs. And what I'm saying around 12 is, hey, if you get through this level on both anchored VWAPs, the one from the previous day, always look at the previous day when you have a movement up and a reversal. If we get through that, we're probably going to continue to push. And we know that it tested there about what, 14 times today before it finally got through and pushed. Reminder, by the way, guys, you have Taiwan Semi's earnings tonight. Taiwan Semi will be out with earnings before 6 a.m. Go take a look at Taiwan Semi from 2 o'clock on. Tell me if there were buyers. Tell me if you think it leaked. You can drop that in the comments below as AMD turned green. But go and drop the comments on there. Very little follow through. There was nothing to do. It got very quiet early in the morning with day trading. Very little to do there. A lot of stuff faded that shouldn't have faded. Something I'm looking at that's race. We're sitting on the 55. Let me get to it here. I do appreciate that I get to do these unscripted. But what we start looking at right here is 20 years bond auction is in 14 minutes. So we know what it is. We've been talking about it all morning. We talked about it on the pre-market public one. We talked about it pre-market private. We've talked about it all day, and it was in the private pre-market newsletter. Like I hammered this home for a reason. And then you can just kind of see what starts happening. And so what we're starting to look at 12:58 is what's the first action? What's happening? Right at 1 o'clock, right? That's when I put that out. Boom, spikes. Okay. So as soon as we see that spike, initial move was to sell. So at 102, we know that's it. That's the way they're going. So we know that if they're going to have higher yield, we know the S&P is going to drop. I don't care what pattern you're looking at, what indicator, and you're talking to a technical trader, right? If you've been watching these videos, I've been trading technically over 20 years. It doesn't matter what pattern you're doing because all the algorithms are going to change what they're doing. That's what matters. That's all that matters. Initial move was to sell. And then you can see this right off the open. Anyone can set this up on TradingView, and I've dropped this link several times for you guys, right? I think even if you follow me on TradingView, you get access to it. It's free either way. I mean, you can set it up yourself. But what it is, it's just line form. It's the S&P. It's the 10-year, or it's the 10-year, it's the dollar. And you can see from that point on what started to happen, right? You can see it. You can see exactly what's starting to set up. So then you can just see the dollar's rising. Everything's going our way. And then you can just see, okay, here we go. Boom, spikes, and you know that it's on. And then you can just start seeing it start to happen. What happens when it spikes? Okay, S&P starts dropping, and then you just, boom, it's real simple. Sell bonds, yields rise, stocks fall. That's it. If you watch the bond auction, you know, simply buy any put and you made money. It was any strike. You didn't have to be a rocket scientist to see this. You just had to know that the data was coming and know that if yields go higher, I'm going to get on t-shirts and sell them to you guys for nothing. Literally 99 cents, the price of a t-shirt. If yield rises, okay, the S&P is going to fall. It's that simple. It's really that simple. Does it always happen? Pretty much. I mean, it's pretty much the easiest trade in the world. I bought the 471s up here. I think I paid 70 cents for them. By the time I was done, within 20 minutes, they were up 100%. By the time I kicked out the rest of them, and all I did with it on, I'm going to walk you through the entire trade so you can watch this and do it yourself, okay? Just on a 1 minute chart, 9 EMA, open, high, low, close. Just waiting for it to break that, right? And you can just see it. I'm just trimming on the way down because you don't know when you're going to get the spike, right? And you can just see it's not breaking, right? It's not doing its thing. It's trying. And then eventually you'd see those 471 puts are over 2%, not one close on the 9 EMA. Boom, first close over 9 EMA, you're out. Now you know how you can do that entire trade. Do yourself a favor, start creating a calendar and start looking at the macro data. It's the simplest trade of the day, all right? So if you're interested in this and learning more of this, let me know. I can do more educational stuff like this, but this is not voodoo. This is not inside information. This is very simply knowing how to read a bond auction and learn what the heck happened. It's very simple stuff. And it's very easy to make money from this particular setup once you know this and you have your parameters built. It's not that hard. And it's something that anybody can learn to do if they really want to learn how to do it. So next, really what we should talk about is what's on the agenda for tomorrow. Let's go to this and just go there. And the number one thing everybody needs to worry about is Taiwan Semi. And you need to be cognizant of this. This is really interesting what's happening because you're going to do a shift here. Now, by shift, what do I mean? Nobody wants old chips. Everybody wants the new chips, right? What's the stock doing after hours? Up $1. That's interesting. It's almost like somebody new. When do institutions start buying stocks usually, right? What do we say here? Around 1:30, 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock's usually when they start, isn't it, right? I wonder if anybody, and just FYI, so you know why they start at 2 o'clock? So you can't see the average daily volume. They don't want you to know what they're doing. I know, isn't that mean? But they don't want you to know what they're doing. I wonder what happened around this time. I don't know. It looks like 2 o'clock. What happened from 2 o'clock on? Unusually high volume on Taiwan Semi, 45-degree angle. We talk about this all the time. Do you think retail's that orderly? Retail's that orderly that they can get involved that easily into that? So then if you take Taiwan Semi and you start looking at NVIDIA, okay, what did you say? Well, you start to see some buying right around what? 150. Almost like a program, right? I wonder what else happened. I don't know. Here's this, 145, 150, never looked back. Okay? So it's very clear that someone thinks that they know something about Taiwan Semi. What's interesting about this is Goldman had a piece. Let me see if I can find it. Goldman had a piece this morning where they were talking about expect more ASP erosion to come from mature foundry space. And they were cutting some of these other Taiwanese companies over there. This is Asia, the foundry space. So I thought that was interesting. And then you're just watching this thing rip. And I have several different metrics in here to measure volume, and you were above all of them. You were just absolutely ripping. Now, the biggest event tomorrow is going to be Taiwan Semi. As we are aware, they will be out at 6 a.m. in the morning. That is obviously because they are based in Taiwan. So we're going to really want to watch this. We're going to want to watch exactly how this plays out. As I said earlier, you could see exactly what was going on here, and you start to see the run in the middle of the day. And it all happened at the same exact time. We can see here right at that 148 level, they just all shrugged it off and they all reversed. What's interesting about that is if we just overlay that exactly with the Qs, that's right roughly where the Qs stopped going. And at the same time, if just to take a look and see if, geez, I wonder if anything else happened around there. If we just went out there and looked at the 10-year, isn't that convenient? That's also when the 10-year peaked. So this is something else that you could do for your trading. In other words, what you do is you start looking at what stocks, when this starts to happen and we peak on the 10-year, right? And then, of course, all we'd have to do to just take the same lesson we just learned and then just apply it to this lesson is just throw the S&P in here as well, and you can see that it's in purple, and you can see, obviously, that's when the S&P bottomed, okay? And then what starts to happen? You can start seeing how these names start lifting. So if you know that this is what's going to happen when the 10-year starts to, right, roll over, if the 10-year is going to roll over, which it did here, and if that's when the S&P is going to stop going down, right? I mean, you talk about when to buy zero-dated options. Maybe you should be looking at bond auctions. So if you take a look at this, you see how you're playing out. Okay, great. So this tells you exactly what names to be in. Now, this is where it gets super interesting. If you take this from that 148 and you just look over, you can see AMD, Taiwan Semi, NVIDIA, Qs, SPY, TNX, right? Now, if you were watching this and you were watching the NASDAQ or the S&P, does not matter. From that date, when those rates peaked, every single one of those trades is up. Okay, so once again, even though that these outperformed and you knew where the money was flowing, right? Because you can go there and just run a simple vol scan and see where the money was going. And you could start seeing how this was just lifting the way that it was. No matter what you did, if you know that that's when rates peaked, and you were interested in being long technology names going into the close for the day, do you think it was helpful if you knew that the bond market peaked? Okay, doesn't mean that it's going to stay peaked, guys. We know that it could just turn around and roll on us. But if you connect that first video and you link it to the first part of this video and you link it to this video, I redid a portion of this. That's why I came out last tonight, because this is such an important concept to get. Everyone sits around and thinks that you're pulling this stuff out and that, you're just picking the price of what a paperclip is out of thin air. And they're going, oh, it's this, and it reversed here, and it did this. Yeah, that's all great. But there's still this huge macro trade that's going on, and that money is trillions of dollars, and that drives the market. Not the guy on Robinhood and not the guy on Twitter that's talking about some sweep, right? That's not what moves the market. It's nonsense. This is what moves the market, right? Huge swaths of capital moving in and out of the market. That's what's doing it. So what we want to do is we want to be cognizant of what's doing it, and then we just want to be the sharks, right? We're the little sharks. They're the bigger sharks. I like to refer to them as they're the big guys and we're the remora. But what we want to do is we want to watch this tomorrow. Now, I didn't think they were going to have very good numbers. I'm just going to go on record. I did not think that they were going to have very good numbers because I figured that everyone's going to retool for the new chips that are coming out. You have the H100 from NVIDIA. You have the H200 from NVIDIA, right? So I figured that that's where we were going to go with this. And then we were going to have some bad quarters. Goldman seemed to think the same thing. That's not what's happening. Matter of fact, the exact opposite. We're seeing Taiwan Semi push into this quarter. So I thought that was pretty fascinating to see, and it made me wonder why. Right? Because it's not retail that's going to do that. That is a lot of volume, guys, out of nowhere. Now, again, as I like to say, anything could happen. But if we mark this off and we take a look, I mean, we have to go back and just say, okay, well, is this a lot of volume? Okay, well, forget that it's above all my metrics, but this is what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, top 10 in the past 12 months of volume that just happens the day before earnings. Somebody thinks they know something. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but we'll find out tomorrow and we'll know when we come in. First thing, I'm already up by then, so I'll know. But I think that's really important. I think you need to pay attention to that. I would watch more economic data tomorrow and see how we act on that economic data and how you act on any bond auctions. I think that's really interesting. Other names that are fascinating to me right now are any of these XLY names that are just absolutely crushing it. You're seeing Race still try to hold that 55. You take a look at ELF after hours, the time recording this. They got added to the S&P mid cap and got taken off the S&P small cap. That's why it's acting wonky right there. Other names and noted of interest. Tesla is fighting for its life. So you have this hammer bar, and this is pretty much what Tesla does to people. You can see how it traded down today. Just FYI, I do have a short position in it, and I'll continue to be short as long as you're below the 200. To me, this thing's in real trouble. This is in real trouble. The fact that you couldn't get over any of these hurdles, you're basically setting up and waiting for a death cross to just start rolling. So it's definitely something that's going to happen eventually. It's just a question of when. As long as you're under 231, 232, you're setting up for a death cross. So that's definitely something I want to pay attention to. Other things that are of note, I would just want to point this out. AMD is absolutely crushing the video on a performance over the past couple of days. I think that's a very important distinction. I think that's something worth noting. Going into the weekend, you're starting to see some interest here in CYTK eventually. Today, you were up about $5 on that trade, and it's starting to push. So this is also something that we're going to want to watch and see how this goes. And you can see how you're acting here as well. I'd watch this one. Docu, that rumor that they were going to get acquired. It's still out there and the stock's still bonking around. The way that I would look at this is I would expect it to push into the weekend, Thursday, Friday, maybe flip this doji, maybe take a look at that tomorrow. That might be another one that might be worth your time. So there's a bunch of these little guys out there that are trading like that. ZIM, watch this today because I thought this was interesting as well. Out of nowhere. And I'm just trying to find the stuff that you could actually find actionable tomorrow. The big idea of today's video and the concept that I really want you to get from today's video is very, very simple. I want you to understand how you can utilize macro data and make way more informed decisions than 99% of the traders out there. Way more informed decisions than 99% of the traders out there, okay? Now, if you take a look at what's going on here, look at that volume spike just out of nowhere. 700,000 shares, just out of nowhere at 315. Just like whatever, someone just printing. Okay, that's not mom and pop. Okay, that's not some dude on Robinhood that's buying that. Okay, that's somebody that thinks that they know something about what's going on there. And to me, this is devil horns, and so far that devil horns pattern has failed. So as failed bearish patterns go, you want to be on the other side of those, right? So I'd watch to see if you make a higher high tomorrow and see how that goes. Other names, this was a trade I did today. I do like to talk about things that don't work, and I actually did reverse this and recouped some of the money. But Disney, this higher high after that upgrade and holding the 55 and this complete utter rejection of that, if you're a shareholder, this should be pretty much the definition of scary. If you put on a 9 EMA, and we just talk about this for a second and look at it, up, doji, breaks 9 EMA. I mean, that could be in a textbook. That could literally be in a textbook, 101 trading. I mean, it's absolutely perfect. You have the doji, you have the complete a bar right here, which is a Marbuzu black just sitting there, and then you crack it. Like, there's very little to say here. Trade's over, trade's busted. I went long up here, blew some off, made a little bit of money, and then lost money here and got out of the trade. I did short some, and I made some back, but I still think I was a net loser on the day. Sometimes if my trades don't work and they're busted and I see like a setup, you try to think about it objectively and step back and say, hey, maybe I'm just on the wrong side of the trade. And sometimes you are. The sooner you realize it, the more money you can make. I think you could also just pick it off down here when it flips back over the 9 EMA, right? Tries again, boom, matumboed, and then cracks. You could see that as well. Boeing is just an enigma to me. Every time I think today that I had this thing figured out, they just kept chewing me up a little bit on this, and I just finally walked away from it, to be quite honest. These breakouts, this kind of stuff is always scary to me. When you break out and fail, breaks out and fails, breaks out and fails, and then you spend the day rolling down and you take out the low, you got to watch that kind of stuff. This is something that you really want to pay attention to. You have 40 planes that are landed. They were investigated. They're fine. And now they're saying they're going to do the final investigation. I don't even know what that means. You just did an investigation. What are you going to do? The super investigation? It just seems like absolute rhetoric. There are a lot of problems when you really start looking at this. My concern on the short side now would be they get the all clear. And if they get some kind of all clear, then that's just going to rip. This is why I don't play with the name very often, guys, because I think that they're an absolute disaster. They're a train wreck. And you think that that's going to be your problem. And then you go away for the weekend and you come in and a door blows off. That's it.